scientists to break this down. I mean, Catherine, what we're seeing is everything come out in the open, from the NDAA to the wars, to the torture, to the police state. We are seeing the censorship come out in the open. We're seeing the fact that al-Qaeda is being protected and put in power in Libya by Western powers. Everything is pretty much coming out right now that's panicking the system in this open, free information society. The mainstream media is dying, so it's a perfect storm of the old dying media and corrupt governments knowing that we're awake to them, wanting now to try to put the genie back in the bottle. And their attempt to shut down our free speech has really, I think, backfired. Katherine Albrecht, thank you for joining us.
Hey, it's great to be on, Alex, and you totally hit the nail on the head. In fact, this whole thing out of Thailand, they actually wanted to put an all-out block on all social media from the West, and we're citing China as a good example to follow. So obviously, if Thailand and China and Iran, I know you reported on this a couple of years ago when it happened, when they had those riots in the street and were shooting protesters, they told all the journalists, get lost, we don't want any journalists in here. They cordoned it off, and people were taking photos, posting them on the web from their smartphones, and getting right around that. So that's why they want to put these kind of filters onto all of these websites. And those countries, they come out and say it openly. You know, you look at China and you say, all right, well, China's going to come right out and say, you have no freedom. You can't just do whatever you want. North Korea is a perfect example. And what you're pointing out is that our government now is starting to do the same thing. The things that used to be whispered about and considered conspiracy theory are now openly published. They're open statements. They're open policies. Same thing is true, obviously, with the search engines. You've got, you know, Google and Yahoo and Bing, which for years, if you were over in Beijing and you typed in Tiananmen Square because you wanted to find out about the massacre, but you were behind the walls of China, you would not get. Those search engines would actually censor your results and only show you happy families picnicking in the park. And so from behind that iron wall of China, you could not even discover that there had been a massacre. Why? Because all the information that we get nowadays, we're getting through the search engines, we're getting through these big companies, and all it takes is for one government to get 3 or 4 of them to say, hey, yeah, we'll all get on board and we'll shut down and censor your information. And we could be back to the dark ages. I mean, we could be worse than Stalin, Soviet Union, where there was only one source of information. You know, I was just talking on my show recently about this this article that came out, should Google take the crazy off of the internet? And somebody actually came out and said with a straight face that, and this was like in Forbes, so, you know, this is this is not just some guy's blog, but came out and said, we really think that Google should start flagging websites that don't meet basic criterion of accepted scientific fact. And they were talking about creation websites. They were talking about 9/11 truth websites. They were talking about Obama birth certificate concern websites and, you know, political type issues, and saying that first Google should start off by putting a little flag and saying, these are not, you know, vetted by Google, or these are not approved websites, or these are crazy websites. And then, of course, your next step, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see, your next step from that is going to be saying, well, let's just make sure those aren't even there. And
well, they've said that. I mean, Google's already delisted us 2 years ago from their Google News function. And
you guys got kind of some screwage there on YouTube, too, not long ago.
Yeah, we've had to do all sorts of stuff. I mean, Paul Watson's been in areas of Europe and in England, and they have the government-free Wi-Fi at the train stations. InfoWars and Prison Planet has a notice. This is extreme. You're not allowed to go there.
Unbelievable. So, yeah, and this is why, you know, the last week, of course, last week, Google made its big announcement that it's going to take all of its products, all 60 of its privacy policies, 60-plus privacy policies, consolidate them into one. And, you know, you look around, and I'm just working on an essay called When Did Google Become a Verb? You know, we are all unthinkingly logging onto this website and doing much more than we realize we're doing by using these services. I have some friends who are in the privacy movement, who are in the freedom movement, who use Google Voice. I'm like, dudes, have you read the privacy policy? Do you realize that that service is recording every phone call you make, every one of your contacts? Google. So I think it's interesting. This is a good time. And I know everybody says, what are you talking about, Catherine? It's the worst. But I say this is a good time because this is the first time, Alex, that the kinds of things you and I have been talking about, and I know you even go back before I do, because you were one of the folks who helped wake me up back in 1999 when I became an advocate. So, you know, those of us who've been saying this for over a decade, you know, we are now no longer people crying in the wilderness. We are now the mainstream. We are now the people saying, hey, all of you out there who are concerned about this is what we've been talking about all along, and wake up. And they're waking up in droves. So, this whole Google thing, and as your listeners probably know, I work with startpage.com, which is the private alternative to Google, looking at what the internet is all about right now and saying, okay, how do we support alternatives? How do we get alternatives like Startpage, that serves you Google results without the tracking? How do we do that for everything? And, we're working on startmail.com, a Gmail equivalent. I would love to see equivalent browsers. I'd love to see an equivalent internet.
Some of the other threats we see developing and the unification of how all these spy systems are tied in together.
Well, the internet, Alex, as anybody who's been watching it for the last 15 years, has become the backbone of virtually everything we do. And, it's not just the internet, it's the fact that our phone calls are now being routed through it. You've got lots of people using voice over IP. You've got essentially this data cloud that's also being created. And all of the stuff that we do is about to wind up on the internet. And I think that's why, Google's announcement is so interesting, because Sergey Brin, back in the founding of Google, or after the founding of Google, a couple of years ago, was asked, what do you envision Google becoming? What's the ultimate search engine? And his answer was, like the mind of God. And, you put all that together and you say, okay, so we are creating essentially, and you and I have talked about this before on the show, we're creating a kind of a backbone or a nervous system across this planet. And I've said this before, it's not accidental that we call it the net. A net traps things. It's not accidental. We call it a web because a web traps things. We are creating, if you could stand in outer space and see all of the interconnected links of information flow across this planet, it would look an awful lot like a net or a web. And the things that ultimately are going to be caught in that are us. And so as these things consolidate, I was just rereading 1896, King Camp Gillette. What a name. His parents named him King, the guy who created the Gillette razor company. And came up, he was the first, by the way, back in 1896, back in the 1800s, he was the first guy to come up with a disposable consumer product, which is fascinating to me because now virtually everything you buy is disposable. And he was the guy who created that. Prior to that, everybody had a straight razor and they sharpened it with a strop, and you get one when you came of age. You might get another one when you got married, and that was it for your life. You had one razor. And so he came up with this disposable concept that now has polluted our whole planet. But one of the things that he was working on back then was this idea that left to its own devices, capitalism was going to lead to one single store, one single manufacturer for everything. He was basically talking about communism, socialism, the central control. And when I was looking at that, I was thinking, wow, so that's Walmart. Back in 1896, this Gillette guy was predicting Walmart. Well, he didn't have the ability to do it yet, but he could have been predicting Google, because it's the same concept. You've got, in the same way that Walmart is like how people buy stuff nowadays and has the power to snuff out other companies and eliminate competition. And, I reported on this a couple of years ago. In England, some commentator on the supermarket industry said, England is too big for 3 supermarkets. We're going to have to get it down to 2 and eventually 1. So everything's moving to this hugeness, consolidation, and we're going to start seeing the same thing on the internet. We're already seeing it. I remember back in the 90s when I was a graduate student at Harvard, and we were like the first people to ever use the internet. It was new. It was not graphical. It was all text. It was, hard to navigate. And we were like, how cool. There's a million people on here, and they're all doing their own thing. Now you go on the internet, and virtually everything is under these couple of few umbrellas, as you well know. So that's why I think alternative radio, I think supporting InfoWars, supporting what I'm doing over at my radio show at KatherineAlbrecht.com, supporting all of the alternative sources of news is going to be crucial. And in the same way, when you start looking, and again, I think the reason everybody got scared about this Google announcement is all of a sudden, you've got them pulling tight the reins. It's like the net was sort of loosely kind of being built around us. We didn't realize it, and now they're pulling it.
And that was always the plan.
It is. It can be a little overwhelming, doesn't it? It can leave you a little bit stunned. And, I always try to encourage people, though, because it can be so easy to just say, it's too much. We can't fight back. There's nothing we can do. And then I take a look, and one of the things that's really encouraged me in the last probably decade or so has been the natural foods market. You know, just organic foods. If you just think about that alone, and obviously that's just one tiny little sliver, but there was a time, 10, 15 years ago when those of us who were saying, wait a minute, they're putting all this garbage and there's hydrogenated vegetable oil and corn syrup and it's all in our food and everybody's getting sick. And then little by little, the activists, the people telling their friends, the listeners like your listeners, sending emails and distributing your information, getting the word out, created a grassroots movement that has now made the organics market the fastest moving food market in the country today. So obviously that's just one sliver, but I encourage people not to give up and not to lose heart, because there are projects that people have been working on for, 3-4 years, and they say it's not getting anywhere, we're not getting any traction. And then you look up and you go, wait a minute, woo, things are changing. So don't lose hope. And I think the key thing, and this is why I think the internet is where this whole fight really comes together. You can talk Agenda 21, you can talk toll roads, you can talk North American Union, you can talk all this stuff, but where the crux really is this internet, this ability to communicate, because if they can shut that off, if they can keep us from communicating, if they can censor, watch, and filter us, and make sure that you can't even log on to send an email without a thumbprint that puts you through some FBI computer that makes sure you're pre-approved, if we can't communicate with each other at that point, then anything they want to do is going to be doable. So the key, and this is why I'm such a huge supporter of your radio program. It's why I do radio. It's why I encourage people, use startpage.com, get a private email address, pay attention, because, and don't just fall into the easiness trap. It's really easy to just flip on and listen to, whatever mainstream media is blathering out on your car radio if you don't take the time to try to find some real radio. It's really easy to just use whatever default search engine is on your browser, which is going to be Google. It's simple. It's hard to say, let me find Alex Jones, let me listen to Katherine Albrecht, let me find startpage.com, let me make those switches. And the thing I liken it to, Alex, do you remember back when there was really nothing but Microsoft Word? That's all you had was just Microsoft. And everybody all of a sudden started typing in Times New Roman 12-point font, like overnight. Like everybody just used that one font because those were the default settings. And this is kind of a phrase that I use a lot just in my own work, is I think, all right, what are the default settings here? The default setting is what you're always talking about, though, with different language. You're born, you go to K through 12, you do 12,000 hours of public school, government school seat time to be indoctrinated, and then you go and you go to your college or your whatever job, and then you retire and you pay your taxes, and that's the end of you. And meanwhile, you're being watched, controlled, manipulated, and used. And that's the default setting. Other people are finding ways to switch that off. Let's homeschool our kids. Let's take an alternative way of getting through the education system. Let's take an alternative way of finding out information. Let's find an alternative way of searching the internet or sending email or making phone calls or whatever it is. And it's really turning off those default settings and being conscious about it. And let me tell you, people are ready. That's why,
that's the secret.
Is an alternative. Organic food's an alternative.
And that's the secret.
Yeah, the key thing, and again, I keep coming back to the same point, we've got to take the tools that we have and hang on to them with both hands, kicking and screaming, to not let go of them. That's why the whole SOPA protest, regardless of whether it was the corporate guys doing it, I think it sent a message to the general public that, wait a minute, so there is a power game going on, and we can use the internet to stop something that seems more powerful, like, basically Congress. So the SOPA thing was a beautiful experience, I think, for us nationally as a nation, of people who want freedom to say, oh, wait a minute, so things can change. And I want people to grab a hold of that, even if you don't like the companies that did it or the websites that did it. It doesn't matter. The reality is that was a perfect example of the internet coming together, coalescing. And what is the internet basically other than us? Coming together and coalescing, collectively putting their foot down and saying, heck no, you're not going to do whatever it is.
Well, that's it. That's it. But the internet is even more than that.
That's why I got a couple of things I want to recommend. People use cash. Use it or lose it, because cash is your only anonymous payment method. And not only anonymous, because a lot of people say, well, I don't care if people know what I buy. It doesn't matter, because your credit card number can be turned off. Your $50 bill cannot, without a whole other kind of thing going on that everybody's going to notice. But don't rely so much on these electronic things.
And notice they're already trying to demonize cash. They're already trying to get rid of it, because once they've got you cashless, there's no escaping all the fines and fees.
That's right. And not only the fines, fees, and taxes, and them getting their cut of every single thing you do, but also the traceability, the trackability, and more importantly, their ability to say no. So, you know, you look at some of these insurance companies, and they've actually had conversations about using your frequent shopper card. That's how I got started in all this, using the card that you're showing at Safeway or Kroger or wherever you're shopping, and using it to say, you are overweight or you have high blood pressure, and so you cannot buy these particular items. And when you scan your card, rather than making it discounts, it's going to be the mandatory scan of your ID card, and we're going to make you put back all the things on your shopping cart. It's where we're going. So if people don't want to live in that kind of world, and I think most of us don't, then you got to say, how am I contributing to it? And if you're saying, if every other word out of your mouth is Google this or Google that, if you're whipping out your Visa credit card to pay for everything you do, if you're doing all of your purchasing online instead of actually going to real stores, brick and mortar, and supporting local businesses, if you're going to Walmart every time you need to fill your shopping cart, then you are basically contributing to the problem, because doing the status quo, taking those default settings, is adding to the problem, and we've got to be en masse. And I know enough people listen to your program that even if just we did this, we'd have a massive impact. Because, you know, I drive up and down the freeways, by the way, in New Hampshire, and I see InfoWars bumper stickers on the back of random cars. I mean, you are everywhere, Alex. So if the listeners to this radio program would get a clue and say, all right, here are some things I'm going to do. I'm going to start paying cash. I'm going to start patronizing locally owned stores, even if I have to pay more. You know, everybody always says, oh, but everything's so cheap at Walmart. I say, how cheap is your freedom? How much are you willing to sell that for? Because I would rather go to a local store, and I do this consciously, and spend an extra 50 cents on a $2 item, consciously aware, with total awareness that I'm spending more, and I view that 50 cents as me putting money to fund the economy. And those guys want everything. You know, it's the greed factor. I want everything. You know, Google wants all the searches and all the phone calls and all of the everythings. And, you know, and by the way, I shouldn't single out Google, because that's kind of not fair. It's also Yahoo. It is Hotmail. And again, you know, our parents didn't know that, and our grandparents didn't know it. They saw Walter Cronkite on the evening news, and it was gospel. So that's my point. And what has changed that, and what has created this window for us to know this, to actually be able to hear what you're saying and understand it, believe it, and understand that it's true and that that is the way the world works. This is like unprecedented. People have always believed the propaganda, except for a tiny, teeny little minority. And now you've got the majority getting it, and they get it because of the internet, which is why they're scrambling so much to shut it down.
Well, you know, Hillary talked about this, and so did Brzezinski last year, that the public's finally awake to them for the, quote, first time in history, and they're losing the info war. But expanding on that into domain registrars that are anti-SOPA, can't you, Catherine?
Yeah, you can, and, you know, go to startpage.com to do it, not Google. But yeah, and, you know, we're working on an email. And by the way, if people want to be beta testers, they can email me, just KMA@startpage.com, and I'll see if I can get them on the beta test.
Very exciting. We're going to have to get you back on more about this. Thank you so much, Katherine Albrecht. We're on tonight, 7 o'clock Central.